Hello and welcome to Think Like a Game Designer. I'm your host, Justin Gary. In this podcast, I'll be having conversations with brilliant game designers from across the industry with a goal of finding universal principles that anyone can apply in their creative life. You could find episodes and more at thinklikeagamedesigner.com. In today's episode, I speak with Stefan Engblom. Stefan works at Supercell, a company that has made games that have had hundreds of millions of downloads, sometimes 100 million downloads in a single day. They make billions of dollars with their games every year, and Stefan has worked on some of the biggest ones, including Clash Royale and Heyday. This is an incredible episode where we unpack what it means to build games at this scale. What's the process in Supercell for how games get greenlit, how games get destroyed, even when they're going to make tens of millions of dollars or more, and the process of going to get a job like this. We talk about the 2 a.m. party principle, which can tell you how to find the career that you need. We talk about how to build a community, and Stefan builds a community in Finland and creates an entire national board game community. And we show how he does that and talk about how you might do that for your own communities. We talk about how to react and analyze player feedback and tons more. I knew Stefan was going to be a great guest when I had a conversation with him that I talk about at GDC, but I think he over-delivered with an incredibly detailed view of how these massive games get made and the kinds of trade-offs and thinking that goes into it. So I know I loved this conversation, and I know that you will. So without further ado, here is Stefan Engblom. Hello and welcome. I am here with Stefan Engblom. I'm hoping I got the name right, but Stefan, it's great to have you here.
It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, so this is actually in many ways me returning the favor. We get to meet. I got invited to a Supercell event that was at GDC just this year, and it was by far my favorite event of the entire convention. GDC is Game Developers Conference, kind of the heart of the game industry getting together and really kind of deep diving on a lot of subjects. And it was really just Supercell didn't have anything they were trying to sell. They didn't have anything they were trying to promote. It was just a bunch of like people interested in game design getting together to talk about game design, the art of game design. And you and I ended up having a really great extended conversation there. And I was like, okay, we got to share this with the audience. So I guess I just want to, one, say thanks for that, and two, kind of get a sense. What is it like working at Supercell? Is it really that kind of vibe permeates through the whole community? Because it really felt like quite a refreshing thing for a company like that.
Oh yeah, I think it was like a very Supercell thing actually. Like that whole event, like it was very true to our like vibe in a way. I'm super happy to hear actually. That was our first time we organized something like that, and we definitely wanted to keep it like very, very casual, very like, hey, let's get together, let's get senior people together, let's not like have any fuss, let's not have the like any kind of marketing talk, let's not try to sell, let's just like talk about games, talk about game design, and like get to know each other, and nothing else. And so it's super happy to hear that like you enjoyed it.
Yeah,
I'll pass on.
Yeah, please do. And so this was another thing that was great for me because it was partially because of this podcast. I kind of got invited, and I get to, I've known this for a while, but I haven't really had a chance to deep dive. There's such a huge game community, Finnish game community, and Helsinki in particular. There's a ton of companies, there's a ton of designers out there, and I haven't really had an opportunity to speak with many of them. And so I'd love to kind of dig in a little bit to your origin story. For a lot of the stories I tell and that people tell on this podcast, it's very, very American centric, just because that's where I spend most of my time. And so, what is it like to kind of start a game design career, and how did you get started out there? I think a lot of people would be really interested, so they can know that it's not just the people who I happen to know from California that that can become great game designers.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, Finland has a really bustling like game industry and game community, and it's actually like gotten a bit more known also like around the world through some big companies like and known companies like Supercell and Rovio, who's known for Angry Birds, and Remedy Entertainment, known for example, Alan Wake and Max Payne. And oddly, like listening to like your podcast, like many of the origin stories on personal level are actually like fairly similar. Also in the like the origins of like what games we played as kids and stuff like that. That's like very similar. But like yeah, Finland has its own like peculiarities. So uh, let's start with my origin story then. So I have played games, of course, my entire life. I really, for me, started with like traditional card games, and then also like just with a 52 card deck, and then also like computer games with the early computers. We had an MSX Spectra Video, which was like at the same era as the Commodore 64. The Commodore 64 was like super popular in Finland, but like we ended up having an MSX Spectra Video, and I loved it. I think it's better. That's my hot take. Uh, and we had that. I was like 6 years old or something, 4 years old when we got that. My brother was like 5 years older than me. He was more focused on kind of the hardware stuff and like making things work, and I just played the games. And yeah, and then we got an Amiga after that, and we were also like playing board games, and we had this like small group of like 6 people, and we were then also playing like started playing tabletop role playing games. First it was my brother and his friends, but they got me in, like I was the young annoying little brother who had to be taken in. But like yeah, we kept on playing like tabletop RPGs, and then also some of us started playing Magic the Gathering. And yeah, we had from tabletop RPGs we had like Rune Quest and Dungeons and Dragons. Those were like certainly the ones that we played most. Also some Cyberpunk and Call of Cthulhu. Yeah, then eventually, like yeah, Magic the Gathering I played quite a lot. Like I went really deep. Like I ended up playing like in tournaments and stuff. Like I didn't go to like pro level as I know you've been, but like I did play in like some pro tour qualifiers and that we had in Finland. There was like a very active and still is like an active like kind of Magic the Gathering community in Finland. There was even a couple of, I think there's been like 2 or 3 world champions also like coming from Finland in Magic the Gathering.
Yes, no, it's a strong game community and design community, and yeah, a lot of
Yeah.
as you've echoed already, a lot of the origin stories of people in this industry tend to come through RPGs like Dungeons and Dragons and through TCGs like Magic the Gathering,
Yeah,
and those
absolutely.
two.
And like there's this kind of a specifically with Dungeons and Dragons and Magic the Gathering, there's this very strong when it comes to game design. There's this very strong thing that like in both those games, like you are also a game designer. Whether you're a player or you are a dungeon master, you are in some parts like a game designer. You are like partially responsible for the experience that's happening at the table. Even in like Magic the Gathering, you build decks and stuff, and you also like kind of uh, you wanna like build decks that are similar to the decks that your opponents have in terms of power level. That's what you see often when you now read on like online about like commander games and stuff like that. People are like have a lot of these social conflicts about like, oh, he came with this power level and I came with that power level and whatnot, and like the experience weren't great. So like everybody is actually kind of responsible for that experience, but that's like it's not like super evident in tabletop RPGs. It's more evident. But anyway,
No, I find there's a really interesting little tangent there, right? When it comes to, I mean, I've definitely dove into that subject before when it comes to, these games force you to design and create, but there's a nuance there that we haven't talked about as much when it comes to like these kinds of multiplayer social games like Commander and
mm,
Magic, where
mm,
you're playing. And I remember even during my earliest days playing Magic before I got really super competitive with it, it would just be these massive multiplayer games. There wasn't a concept of commander, but we'd all just kind of be playing. And you didn't want to be the guy that brought like this super competitive like stasis deck, which locked down everybody's resources and made the game not fun. Everybody hated that guy, right? And so like there was no explicit rule per se, but there was a kind of social norm, and you're even more recognizing like, everybody kind of wanted to win, but what you're really trying to do is craft this experience, and we're all responsible for co-creating that experience, which is of course what you do in a role-playing game. We're co-creating a story, we're co-creating an experience. And then in many of these kinds of games of Magic where you're not just the hyper competitive level, there's a lot going on, and people express themselves through those things, right? You want to build your elf deck or your angel deck or some cool combo thing, right? It just gives you an opportunity to kind of get your feet wet in game design, even though you're playing in somebody else's sandbox. And there's now, I imagine when I do this podcast 5 years from now or 10 years from now, I'm going to get a lot of people who are like, oh, I started with Minecraft and I started with Roblox and these other things. Roblox is more explicit about it, but there's a lot of these things that give you this freedom to create that I think is the precursor. So I think it's a nice way for people to kind of get there. People want to start with design, don't necessarily want to have have to go all the way to making their own games. Make games within other people's games, right? Using modding communities, using tools like building decks in Magic, or it's a great way to get started. I have so many questions I want to ask about your time at Supercell, because there's a lot of fascinating things there. But so then this jump, let's just cover. I just want to cover the link here.
I'll try to like kind of make. I don't know. I don't know if there's a short version, but I'll try. Okay, so then in my like teenage years and late teenage years, like it was it was harder to get together to play like tabletop RPGs, to have like this campaign, have the same group get together and stuff like. So I started getting into board games, and because that was more agnostic of like the kind of the group, so I could play with different people at different times and different amounts of people. So and I got like very deep. I got into the kind of the Finnish board game scene, and ended up co-founding the Finnish board game society in Finland, and really kind of like be part of like driving this kind of new Euro game renaissance like in Finland. So I was like, I feel that I
around
played
what timeline was this?
This was like early 2000. So there was like I think one of those like cool, like I remember like two games that were like really influential, like mind blowing for me. Those were like Carcassonne and Tikal, and then also like Puerto Rico. So it was that time, like 2001, Carcassonne was launched, if I remember correctly. So that was like that's also when this like kind of the whole boom. So it's kind of like happened simultaneously elsewhere as well. So there was also like Rio Grande Games was founded in US, and
this was definitely a time where Euro games were kind of taking off, and I don't know, maybe it may be worth defining Euro games for those that don't know what that means. It's not that necessarily that easy to define, but do you have a short definition you can give for people that they can follow along with the types of games we're talking about?
Okay, yeah. So there's kind of like two schools of games generally. Like when it comes to board games, there's the American style games, and then there's Euro games, and of course there's lots of blend and stuff. But the kind of the first, the American style games, that's your like war games and very thematic games. Nowadays, like typical examples are also like fantasy flight games and stuff. And then there's Euro games, and those kind of originate more from like Germany and German games, and they are a bit more abstract. So they kind of feel more abstract. There's like feels like there's a theme that is based on like the classic Mediterranean trade.
We are farming like most of the time,
or farming or something. But they're also like one key descriptive thing is that it's all often like very peaceful themes, like trading and farming, rather than like war and conflict and direct confrontation. And it's a lot about like being efficient, being like the most efficient farmer, or being getting victory points or getting most money or something, rather than like eliminating the other players.
That's great. That's a great.
They are also like often quite and they're often also a bit shorter in length and a bit like more tight rules wise.
Yeah, much more tight mechanics and less theme focused, more mechanics focused is the simplest way I've heard that. But actually, there's a lot of really great threads you pulled out of there. But so I just wanted to kind of give people enough, so they could understand where we're
Yeah,
at.
sure,
But what I actually want
for
to
sure.
dig into is you founded the Finnish. What was it? Was the Finnish Board Game Society? Was that?
Yeah, the Finnish Board Game
Yeah.
Society. Yeah,
So this is one of the things I often talk about for people, right? For people who are a lot of times when I say you want to get in the game industry, start going to conventions, start going finding a community near you, start getting involved with people. But for people who are in communities where they don't exist, or there may be not as much of that formal structure, you can create that structure. And so that's something that you did. And I think it's a really underappreciated part of the process. If you serve that purpose of building those communities, you are immediately going to get, you're adding value already. So you're already going to build relationships. You're going to start get more opportunity to try things and learn games and learn from other people. And so it's a really
absolutely.
powerful tool. So maybe if you have a couple of tips for people, I know this was a little while ago now, either, how you would recommend people go about it, or maybe some of the things that worked or lessons you learned as you were building a community like that.
Yeah, I think like things have also like changed on that front a bit, because like now like online communities are way more like vibrant. So I think it's like a bit easier to like get in, but it requires work, and it's and requires you to be like active. But yeah, I don't know what would be like there. I think there are a lot of like resources and a lot of good tips like around there for like organizing. I think you can like start very like don't I think you shouldn't think too big. Like think of things like, oh, there's this cool convention, like local convention, or maybe the local game store. Like maybe I could like organize a little tournament there. Like that would be fun. Like I really like this game of mine. Let's say it would be Soulforge Fusion. Like so, I,
Good
for you. So
choice.
like,
Good
hey,
choice.
I could good choice exactly. Yeah. So like, hey, I could like organize like a game of or like a tournament of Soulforge Fusion. That would be cool. Like I'll go and suggest this to my local game store, and then you can go there, and then like start with something like that. Like uh, and I think one important aspect I think is like or something, because I mean this whole topic has actually resonated with me like, quite a lot when you have talked about it in your podcast. And but I think like one thing for me was that like I never did it because I specifically thought that like it's going to lead to the game industry. It's going to lead for me to get a profession. I did it because I really just wanted to do it. I loved it. Uh, I wanted to organize an event because like I love games. I wanted to organize a tournament for some game or
Yes.
whatever. And I think that's like kind of important, because like even if it doesn't, like you gotta enjoy the journey. In other words, like enjoy the like do it because you want to do it. Don't do it because like there's an end goal in mind, because like that's very likely gonna end up in a disappointment, and also like you might not enjoy the ride. So
Yes. No,
those
this
would
is
be
great
like some tips
advice in my experience for everything you want to do in life, as a general rule. Like,
too.
if you want to find your ways to enjoy what you're doing, I think trying to get into the game industry just because you want some kind of end goal is usually a mistake. You've got to really be passionate about it, and love what you're
Yeah,
doing. I
yeah,
think it's great. And then your advice is start small, right? Just start with something at your local game store, local convention, just starting to build things. If it's online communities, and starting to contribute in online communities, right? You mentioned Soulforge Fusion, so we have a online Discord channel where people can chat and communicate, and those that were most helpful and answering questions and participating, we as our company now elevated them to Forge Guardians and gave them a bunch of status and cool updates and things, and so
mm,
it just sort of happened organically for these people, and we saw them engaging, and so we said, hey, I want to find a way to reward them. And they didn't do it because they thought they were going to get something out of it. They did it because they were passionate members of the community. And I think that is always been the recipe, for every aspect of what you're doing here. So I think that's great.
yeah.
Um,
And this certainly has happened like at Supercell as well, that there are like that we actually have employed some people who have been like very active in the community, and there are people also like lots of people of course who are like happy to be in the community, and like kind of be active there. They are might be moderators in our Reddit pages, or they might be moderators in Discord. They might be Twitch streamers, or YouTubers, whatever. Like there's a lot of like options.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
I
So
think that's like
finding doing a thing you're passionate about, finding an area. There's so many different ways to contribute now. Whether it's and you just mentioned a bunch of them. And so finding the things where your kind of combination of your skill set, your interests, and your passion, and something that's going to be valuable to the world is can all overlap, and that's a great. It's just a great way to think about
absolutely.
pursuing a career of any kind. Just doing things you're passionate about and adding value to the world. Great.
And it's also good to know that like it's not necessarily like kind of the you might even be happier just like being on that level where you're like organizing stuff and being in the community and being a passionate player rather than being someone like on the other side being like in the industry. So like that's that was a place where that I had to like kind of contemplate a lot. Then like eventually that like what would it actually be to like kind of work in the game industry rather than just have it as a hobby. So
Sure.
like
Yeah.
so uh as then continued. So I was like, yeah, I think I was like 10 years or something, like very active with, or maybe with the board game society stuff, organized a game club, organized events, etc. And meanwhile I actually studied finance. So I didn't like study anything related to games. I studied finance and I ended up working in accounting and finance reporting and stuff like that. So I actually worked like, I think I worked 8 years on in the finance industry, with like with a lot of with like finance reporting, accounting, topics like that. I think it was interesting, but I definitely wasn't passionate about it. And I have a like a story of this like particular moment when I felt that like I want to actually pursue the game industry. I don't know if it's
Yeah. No, you've got my
yeah it's
attention. I'm hooked. Let's go. Tell me the story.
yeah so it was a party. So there was party, like when you work in places there are parties every now and then. So it was one party and we were at the after party, and I think it was like 2 a.m. and we were at a club, and I saw two, like one of my colleagues and then one representative of one of the banks who were like hosting the party, that they were discussing about foreign trade. So they were sitting at the couch at 2 a.m., a little bit tipsy, and they were passionately talking about foreign trade. And I was like, "Hey, dude, so what the heck? Like, that's like we're partying here. That like, that why are you talking about foreign trade?" And but then it dawned on me that they weren't they were talking about foreign trade because they were so passionate about it. They were like, they
Mm.
really loved their craft and they wanted to improve their craft and they wanted to talk about it. And then I realized that like I wanna work with something that like I want to like at 2 a.m. be talking about that topic. And
Mm.
it was very clear that that's games for me. Like that would be games for me. So that was like this one particular moment when even if it had been like kind of brewing in my mind for a long time, but that particular moment I remember that like this thought crossed me, and this particular example that like that I want to be at a party at 2 a.m. and I want to be talking about my profession. And it has happened
Yes.
multiple times after that, and I've always been happy to talk about game design at 2 a.m.
And the 2 a.m. party principle. I like it. I like it
Yes.
a lot. That's a great story. Yeah. Okay. So now
So
you've
then
had
so
the
then
party moment.
then what
Now
happened?
what?
So now I'm like, okay, yeah, now I'm like, okay, I want to work in the game industry. What do I do next? Okay, so it was like actually a 2 year, like a 2 year process. Like I started thinking that like, okay, how would it actually be to work in the game industry? Was like first like, do I actually want this? Will it kill my passion for games if I make it into a profession? And and then also like, okay, how do I go about this? So well, because now we get back to the like why it was good to like be active in the community. I of course knew a couple of people who work in the game industry at that point, because I had been because there were like several board gamers in the industry. So I contacted them and I was asking for like hey, let's have coffee, let's have a chat like about this topic and all that. And they recommended me to this one thing that is like also like a very big thing in Finland, which is these IGDA meetups, International Game Developers Association. I'm not sure in how international they are. I think they're at least in Europe, but I think maybe in US as well. But so IGDA, International Game Developer Association, they have like monthly meetups here in Helsinki. And so I was recommended that, hey, like join one of those and go check it out, and you can like meet people who work in the industry. And so I did, and so I got to learn like and get to know like more people who work. And I actually like ended up meeting more people there who were like, oh, you're in the game industry as well, and who I kind of knew from the board game scene and all that. So that helped me get again like more to know people, etc. And then what ultimately then helped me was like one of my colleagues one of my colleagues showed that, hey, there's this like focus test group happening for a game company, that she thought that maybe I would be interested in that kind of stuff because I was like vocal about being a gamer at work and stuff like that. So so I ended up going there, and it was this company called Digital Chocolate that they made mobile games, and their head office was in San Mateo, but one of the dev studios was in Helsinki. The Helsinki studio was originally called Sumea, and it was founded by a couple of the same people who also ended up founding Supercell later. And so Digital Chocolate was looking for some focus testers, and I joined. And then, as a happy accident, I went there, and the guy who was the lead game designer for that game was my friend from the board game scene. And so so we, of course, I tested, I did the thing, and then I stayed and chatted with him more after the session. And I offered then that, hey, like I could do more of this kind of testing if they would be interested, that I could, like, if they have some other like alpha builds, like I would be happy to test and give some feedback on them. And then that kind of like led to then me getting like the foot between the door, and their like design director becoming like a bit interested in me. And I was doing a couple of like alpha tests for them, and then eventually like we had a discussion with him, and like he actually straight on said that like he's not actually that interested in my like test reports. He's more interested in like having a very potential like game designer like kind of close by. And that was, of course, made me quite happy. And I think it was like 1 year later after that I then landed a job as a junior game designer at Digital Chocolate then. So
yeah, no, it's so this is just it's a wonderful story, because this is in some sense a decade of progress, and at least 2 years of focused energy towards this, building relationships, trying doing these things, starting to get involved in the communities that are there, and then eventually getting to turn that in an opportunity to demonstrate your skill and then get the job. So it's just a great kind of a classic narrative of how you do these sorts of things, and so it's great to get to share it. And so Digital Chocolate, now it's pretty obvious how that leads to Supercell, since the same founders bring over there. I want to paint the picture a little bit of Supercell, because I think most people have probably heard of Supercell and heard of some of the games, Clash of Clans and Clash Royale, which you worked on. The numbers are so staggering that I remember what struck me is we were having this conversation at the event, and you were talking about a project that you'd worked on, and I don't remember the details of it or what I'm even allowed to share, but it was basically, the gist of it was, we made this project, it was pretty good, it was going to make tens of millions of dollars a year, and it was not worth our time to finish it, that we handed it off, because the scale of the games that you make, if it's not going to make hundreds of millions of dollars or billions of dollars, you're not even interested. Like that blew my mind. So maybe you can flesh out a little bit here so people understand before we start digging into the design principles and things that work here, like how
Yeah.
what this is like.
Yeah, it's yeah. I have to think that like what kind of numbers can I actually like publicly talk about. Uh, of course, there are numbers that are public about our success and about the game. So
Yeah,
uh,
like I'll share ones. I mean, just
I
things I found on
yeah.
Wikipedia, right? So of the
Okay,
things I know, it's like
okay,
I believe Clash of
yeah.
Clans
So that
is the game that has made the most money of any game on uh, on mobile. I read a note about that you're the Clash Royale, which you had worked on, sort of the card game variation of it, had made
yeah.
something like $2.5 billion over 3 years. Was the last note that I had seen, and that was even as of 2019. So who knows where it's been
Yeah.
since then. So those are just a couple of numbers that kind of just like and pieces of data that kind of blew my mind. And
Yeah,
I'm sure there's more, but
yeah.
just to give a sense of stuff I know you can share because
Okay,
it's already
yeah.
public.
Those are certainly ballpark numbers. So like kind of we are talking about like we're in the like billions of annual revenue, uh, or like half a billion of annual revenue and stuff like that.
And
And
this
then
is
also
all
like
coming from
player,
free to play mobile games
yeah,
exclusively.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then
Okay.
there's the player counts are also like quite high. I think we've talked about those. There's been like uh, what would be like we've had like kind of we've been on like 30 million DAU. We've had at some point we had like 100 million DAU across all our games. So like 100 million players in one day played like our like 4 of our games like logged
Uh,
in, and
Unbelievable. Yeah.
yeah, that's quite a
Unbelievable.
lot.
The numbers
I, I
are
think
so
I think
staggering.
those like kind of
It's hard to wrap my head around it.
like talking about like huge games. Of course, like I know on the PC, for example, League of Legends is known to be like huge game. I think I can't remember exactly, but they have also like reached something like 30 million DAU, for example. So in one day, 30 million
Right.
players playing, I think. But
And you
yeah,
and
those are like
you're at
massive
100
numbers.
million. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
but
insanity.
it
So
was of
okay,
course
so
for all against. But still, yeah, those are like kind of yeah. And we've had like in stores when Clash Royale launched. Uh, I think this is like somewhat public information, but like when Clash Royale launched, like it was in within a week we had 30 million installs, for example, uh,
okay.
which
All right. So I
like
think we've done enough
yeah.
of this
So
context
we
building.
we
So
are at
hopefully
pretty big scales. We're at
you're
pretty big scales.
kind of a big deal. So I want to just set the stage here because I want to spend a fair amount of time. It's like I want to level up my own thinking here, right? I can't even conceive of making games with that scale of an audience, and I'd like to by the end of this conversation have my mind opened up to it. So let's maybe walk me through what does it look like when they're trying to either, and I want to attack this from any angle, so you can pick wherever you want, right? Starting a project like this, scaling a project like this, marketing a project like this, testing it. Like, what does it take? How do you build, especially with this, obviously in the context of free to play mobile? How do you start thinking about building projects at that scale?
Yeah, that's a that's a
I know
big
it's
question.
meaty. It's meaty. So pick
It's
any
a very
piece of it
meaty
you'd like.
question. So let's start from like kind of the company culture and the kind of the fundamental thoughts on like how we want to make games at Supercell, which has been kind of uh, not copied, but people, lots of companies are kind of replicating it and like kind of being inspired by the way Supercell operates. So we like our we have some like really strong values that include trust, independence, and responsibility. And so like we are like the name Supercell comes from the teams being these cells that are consist of like high performing great individuals that make a really great team, and who are able to like kind of very independently do like the right decision. So we have like every game team has basically like full trust and full like independence to like do whatever they want. But the caveat is that like we are making hit games, so like you really need to like be thinking like, how do you make $1 billion game, and not just like, oh, I just want to like make something funny as a hobby. Like but the point
Right.
is
You're
that
not
like
making Euro. You're not making Puerto Rico right now. You're not making Euro
yeah,
games.
yeah,
You need something that's going to really have huge,
yeah.
ridiculous, mass appeal.
So for example, like I would love to make like a board game version of some of our games, but it doesn't make any sense for me to like spend time of that, even if I would love that. I could maybe do that on my free time, but the point is that like kind of the idea is that like who knows best like what works in a game. Like it's the game developers. It's not the leadership. It's not some external consultant. It's the ones who actually make the game, who understand the game they are making as well, and everything that like kind of can make the decisions. So like, and there's also like, it's very important that the like with the independence, like I think it's a very important value in that like you feel ownership of what you do. So like if the idea kind of comes, or if it's like micromanaged from above, then you don't feel ownership, and you slowly and gradually like stop caring basically about what you do, and you're like, okay, whatever, like I'll just do what I'm told to do, and I don't care. So like you really want to like I feel like I'm not like perfectly selling this or like kind of explaining this, but one thing is that like the kind of the whole trust and responsibility, like usually it's it's kind of like uh, just words on a PowerPoint.
Right. That's exactly where I was gonna dig in next. Is because what is the difference? Everybody says those things. What is the difference? How do you live it? How does that scale in reality?
Yeah, and that would be like might be a better question for our CEO, but like basically like we certainly live it, and we certainly like kind of it's really true, and it has led to like some really difficult situations and difficult uh, decisions also sometimes, when you like because when you are responsible, for example, when you kill a game, like that's really tricky. I've been like, it's really tough. Like you are not being told that you need to kill the game. You need to do that decision yourself, and you need to
Can you
have
walk me through what
that
that looks
level of
like? Like what that
you
kind of
have to have
even a
that
high.
level.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been in that situation once, but so far I've been yeah, actually, as a background, I've been 10.5 years at Supercell, so I've been a while. When I joined, the success was already there, but it wasn't like publicly known yet, so it was kind of like at the early days of the kind of the success. But Heyday and Clash of Clans were like out there already, so I've seen some ups and downs in the company. But yeah, so killing a game, basically. I mean, the game can be killed in various phases, of course. Like you could kill it like you're developing the game. Uh, you might end up like killing it at that point. Like you feel that, okay, this doesn't have what it takes. This doesn't click enough. This doesn't like make sense, or this doesn't feel scalable enough, or whatever the reason is. That might be a situation to kill it. And at that point, like you have to like the developers of the game who are working on the game have to identify that, like no, like you can hear feedback and you can like listen to feedback, but no one is gonna like, you have to make the decision.
So, all right. So I'm fascinated by this, and I want to really unpack it because so this idea, if you're if you have how does a game originates? There's a team. The teams, these sort of super cells of groups,
Okay.
are already
Yeah.
defined, or you kind of come together and say, "Hey, we want to make a game." Like, let's start from the germination period, and then we can kind of
Yeah.
maybe walk through the
Yeah.
checkpoints.
I feel like I'm trying to like kind of figure out like how to like explain all this because this it's such a like a huge amount of different like kind of topics
That's
here.
okay.
But like
We got this is
uh,
why it's a long form podcast. We have all the time in the
yeah,
world and there's a lot. And it's I don't expect if it was easy to unpack a multi-billion dollar a
yeah,
year process, then everybody would do it. So it's okay.
yeah,
We're gonna take our time. So we
right,
know that we have these core principles, trust, independence, and responsibility. We know that the
yeah.
individual small scale teams have ultimate authority here. And now the question is, how did that let's start with just like kind of how those teams get formed and how the authority plays out. Ideally, we'll come up with some specific examples, or you can create some hypotheticals if you can't talk about the specifics of like how this team is functioning and integrating and making these key decisions.
Yeah. Okay. So teams are usually formed quite organically, but this is like this process of like how is a new game started that has evolved quite a lot and changed quite a lot along the years. So I think there's been like five different processes or non-processes that have for forming these. Like sometimes we had a more rigorous thing, and then we scrapped that because like it felt like the more rules you added, the clunkier and problematic it got. So, but usually I would say that it's very organic. So you might have right now we have there's a prototype team. They are working on like a couple different they're working on different prototypes there and brainstorming different stuff and trying to just make something that's playable and see if it clicks and then take it further. And basically that kind of phase, the phase where you're doing a prototype, that is usually just like two or three people. Like that's it. Like you're just like testing this like core gameplay, core uh, interaction, or that's happening. And then if it clicks, if it really feels that hey, there's something to this, then this would be a phase when like forming like an actual team. Then this would be a decision when like the leadership would be a bit involved. That like hey, okay, like now we have this concept. It's looking really cool, and we have these people that we have like there's a bunch of people from these different disciplines that would be like kind of really excited to start working on this game for real. And and that's kind of like a soft green light moment in a way that like that okay, like hey, let's start working. Like you guys can go like agree with your current leads, make sure that the transitions work out, all that. So like very organic, in other words, like things happen very organically. But you have to like of course be again, here's again trust and responsibility comes down here. So like even if there would be like a project that feels like super fun and like oh that's cool, like I want to go there and work and they want me to join them, like I can't just leave my current team. I can't just like dump them. That would be like very irresponsible for me, from me. So like I have to like then discuss with my lead that hey, by the way, there would be this opportunity and I would be really interested about this, and let's figure out this transition. Let's hire someone else, or like I have this other guy, this other team who could maybe replace me, and so forth. So like
All right,
this
so
could be
let me just make
yeah,
sure I'm getting this
yeah,
right. So what I heard was you start there's a some people are assigned to this sort of prototype team, which are small little groups that can kind of organically just try stuff, just iterate, try things, see if
yeah,
they get something excited. Then there's some window where they're obviously showing these prototypes off to other people in the company. They
yeah.
get enough people excited from different disciplines because they're showing it to people around. Is there some kind of formal system for this, or it's just sort of organically like, hey, come take a look at this, and you just have people show up?
I'd say it's very organic. Like
Okay.
it's quite
So,
common that there's at some point there's like some kind of what we call company playable. So like it's just opened up to the whole company and anybody can play, and and
Okay,
then
got it.
you kind of like, yeah. So that's pretty common. But yeah.
Okay, so there's a thing that's available to play. Eventually, you get enough positive feedback and enough people like, hey, this is cool. I would totally work on this. Or you got enough of a critical mass that now you go to the leadership and say, hey, I think this is ready to go. I'd like to move it forward as one of these prototypers that now you want to build a team and go. Is it like you approach it, or is there a regular review, or how does that go from leadership saying, yeah, we're gonna pull the trigger here?
Yeah. So what the leadership would be looking at there mostly is the team. Like, is this a team that they would like? Do they believe that this team can deliver?
Ooh, okay.
And
So they're
mean,
not even really evaluating the game at all. You're not pitching the game
not
or anything. You're just saying, hey,
not
this
that
group of
much.
people, okay, this group of
Yeah,
people
not
all
that much.
believe in something.
But
Let's go.
yeah, like
Okay.
probably at that point, like there's some level of validation already for the game itself, in a way that like all that's already some validation that people got excited about it and all that. So
Yeah.
so like
It's
but
really interesting
this
parallel there. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
yeah,
Continue.
yeah. And but then like kind of like at this point things are still like very very organic. Then things get a little bit more formal when you go to like what we sometimes call phase 2. So we have this, we talk about phases, but like it's also like a bit fluffy, but like we talk about phase 0 as this phase where you are making the prototype, and then phase 1 when you're like kind of like a little bit above that, and we're kind of now in phase 1, right? Like we're making a little bit more than a prototype. We're like adding art, and we're like kind of maybe defining the meta game, the progress game around that, like minute to minute gameplay. And and then we go to like phase 2, and phase 2 is like a bit more formal, because that's now like, okay, now you're heading for like some kind of beta or some kind of soft launch. Now we kind of like start actually putting like the core concept is really solid now, and we believe in it, and now we need like more manpower to like actually get this like going. Now here's like an important thing that uh, like that ideally at this point, like you would be at a pretty good phase with the core of the game, and this doesn't always work, but like it's really, because when you start scaling up the team, it gets really tricky to like change the course of the project. So before this, you had maybe like 5 people there in the team. At that point, it's like very easy to still like change completely the course of the project. That like, okay, like, hey, let's maybe change the theme completely, or let's change like kind of the what it's actually about. Maybe it's not a action game, maybe it's a card game or whatever. So like, you can still like do that kind of change. But then when you start to scale to like 10 to 20 people, then it gets uh, immediately like a lot harder. And also like you start to like involve maybe like other teams, like the marketing team, for example, to planning the launch of the game, or stuff like that. So now you kind of like ideally have a pretty solid core. So now you're in phase 2, and you're starting to work towards like an actual launch, to put it out there to the real audience.
Okay, so up to this point, you've not put anything out to anybody outside the company. This is only internal
Usually
testing
not
so
like
far.
usually not, no. I
Okay.
think in the early days we did there was a little bit more of that, but like there's also this thing of like we have some weird problems because of the success. So like we really have to be careful like when we show things to the public, because it's
Mm-hmm.
like a pretty big deal usually.
Yes.
uh, and so that's kind of like you're kind of like a little bit careful with that, sometimes maybe a bit too careful, to
Yeah,
be
one of the
honest.
challenges of being a big successful company is you have a lot more to lose, so you have to be more careful a little bit than
Yeah.
newer, smaller designers or design teams. Okay, so what phase 0 to phase 1, there's a leadership moment that they say, okay, enough people believe in this. We're gonna let you go forward with now. You've doubled the size of the team. Now, how do you move from phase 1 to phase 2, where now you're talking about quadrupling the size of the team and adding in a bunch of different departments? What makes something go from phase 1 to phase 2?
So well, at this point, like there's probably at this point been like certainly like a company playable, and we might even have been looking at like some really like we have a I think we are like 400 right now. That's also something like we are a pretty small company actually, like person wise, considering the scale of our business. Like, but it's still enough that we actually can get like quite a nice testing. It's quite a nice testing environment for our games for sure. So we get to like internally test, sometimes even a little bit extend to like friends and family, uh, depending. And then so at this point, like we do get some validation of like, hey, does this like concept work, right? So like that kind of gives the confidence. Then like the moment, and an important factor here is also like the momentum in the team. Like, does the team believe it? Like, there's been projects where like people have been like excited. They're like, hey, this was like super cool, like playable, like we're happy, like you should do this. But the team actually ends up not believing in the project anymore. They are like, okay, like that they see maybe the problems that like the players in like the other people in the company don't see. So that's also like an important place where like the kind of the where like kind of the trust and responsibility comes in, and the independence, that like the team is really, they know the game best. Like they understand the problems, they understand the opportunities and the issues they might be facing. So like if they feel that, hey, don't know there's something like really fundamental that this won't work out, or we don't really have the momentum or the motivation to do these big changes that are like required, or maybe they even went that route, that like, hey, like do this game, except like maybe you should change this one aspect, but maybe they already tried that and figured that it was wrong and so forth. So they might be like
so the team, this gets back to the idea we were talking about earlier, when the team has to choose to kill a project. And
so this might be a phase
easy. And and I love that this is, the principles here of like, you start very small, prototype rapidly, don't spend a lot of resources, slowly build like momentum and get traction, then work on building the other parts, adding resources, art, building the meta game, building other pieces, then scaling up from there. Like this is just a great process. As you get more confidence, you add more resources and spend more time polishing, and then you have these opportunities to kick out. But it seems like now, since you're getting teams to 10, 20 people, then now the cost of failure is higher, the cost of closing it out is higher, and presumably it's just going to keep going up. So now what got us to the point, I'm still not sure I'm clear, like what moved us from phase 1 to phase 2, and then who amongst this now 10 or 20, 4 to 5 people can all kind of agree probably to say, yeah, we're going to stop. 10, 20 people starts to become harder to agree on anything.
That's usually when the team grows. Then when we go to phase 2, like there usually still is this like core team in a way. There is this core group. Usually it's the ones who started, but sometimes there's maybe a new member who kind of joins that group in a way. I've been in that position as well, where I joined a team that was already established, but they were kind of, or maybe some core member, some vision holder, like switched to another project, and then I step in and I kind of become one of the vision holders for that project from there on forwards. So now the point is that like there's like, even if you would have a 20 member team, you still might have like 4 or 5 members who are like the actual like kind of
right. Okay. That makes sense. And so does that core decision maker team, is they're the ones that they get to decide on their own whether you go from phase 1 to phase 2 also? They can obviously choose to kill the game or change direction. Do they just get to say, hey, we're ready, pour on the extra resources, leadership, or does leadership get involved with jumping to that next
there
tier?
there is no hierarchical like power that this group of 4 or 5 people would have, like kind of like an organizational power. It's more like, I don't know. It's kind of weird because it's almost like a silent contract in a way, that like an organic thing, that like you know who are like in this group, and you do of course like you talk about it as well, that like, hey, like we are like kind of the vision holders, etc.
Sure.
But like,
I I could dig into this forever, and yeah, maybe I
Yeah,
do also want to speak to the CEO, because like building this is all kind of cultural norms, like not hierarchical, not explicitly rule based cultural norms that are
yeah,
building these things at scale. That is so rare and so hard to achieve. I'm absolutely fascinated by it. So you've got these. I don't know if this maybe something of like Finnish culture here. It's hard for me to imagine some of this in the
yeah.
U.S.
It's it's not really Finnish either. Like it's because it's quite uncommon. Like also in Finland, that it's actually like really hard to like explain because I've now lived in that environment now for like more than 10 years. So it's like it's just like normal to me in a way. But also like I realized that it's not common to other people. So it's like kind of hard to like explain. We've had a lot of
well,
people who start in our company, like they it takes a while before they then like realize, and that they might come and say that like, okay, like now I get it. Now I understand it. Like I thought it was kind of like just a little bit just talk. I didn't like believe that it was like actually like this, that we would actually be independent, but now I get it. And it's yeah, it's a bit hard to explain in a way, like
Well, it's
without
all
like
right. I'm
living.
gonna,
Yeah,
this is something for me I think about a lot as I scale my own company, right? When it's, if you're the whole company is, we're what 12 or 13 people now with some various extra
yeah,
consultants and people outside of it. And it's still at that stage where, you can kind of talk to everybody and know everybody and, kind of build.
yeah,
But as you scale to, dozens and let alone hundreds, you
yeah.
really need this kind of, cell based systems and abilities to have trust and make sure that the culture continues. And I put a lot of effort
And
into
that's
building company
it is
culture, and
tricky.
so I always look for successful rules
Yeah,
like this, successful companies.
and that has certainly been a big challenge, and those have been like testing points. The whole of like growing the company and all that. Like it's been a testing point for the culture, and there's been lots of internal resistance to like growing the company for sure.
Hmm.
And we've grown deliberately grown like very very slowly. Like most of the people who, especially like the leadership and stuff, they have experience of companies where the companies like grew too fast. One Finnish super company that kind of fell because of that was Nokia. The infamous Nokia, who was like, they were of course like the biggest like uh, phone makers in the world at some point, uh, from the small country of Finland, but they hired like everybody. A lot of people who are work at Supercell now and work in the game industry, they used to work at Nokia. Like they hired like anybody who almost like walked through the door, and they had a lot of middle management and a lot of hierarchy and a lot of people who didn't really actually have like any jobs, and it was like really really tricky, and it kind of like imploded the whole thing. So they hired and they grew too fast. The culture didn't like catch up. So it's been like a thing of like being super careful about how fast we grow and also like who we hire. So I think that has been like a key thing to like that we have like grown very modestly, and also like been very diligent with the recruiting. The recruiting process is has always been like quite long, and like lots of people from different disciplines like interview, etc. and
Yeah.
and
Yeah, this
so
is similar to what I hear from Valve. Valve's process is very similar. When and you need to, in order to have a system that allows for a lot of freedom and individual responsibility, you have to have very hefty gatekeeping up front, that you get the right people that can support that kind of life and that kind of culture.
and yeah, and to be fair, like kind of like I think you should not like this environment is not great for everybody. Like it's not like it's very easy to be the kind of person that wouldn't actually like enjoy working in this environment, because it can be like sometimes it's like really frustrating when you kind of don't know exactly what you should be doing. You need to like figure it out yourself. And so because and I think it's not like it doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't make you a bad person if you're not like if you if you don't want to work. It's almost like like are you an entrepreneur? Sorry, like my pronunciation.
Yeah, you're a little entrepreneur
like
within your own company.
yeah,
That
are you
makes a
like
lot
an
of sense.
entrepreneur or are you like an employee? Like that kind of difference, that like it's not explicitly wrong if you don't want to found your own company. It's not explicitly wrong if you want to be an employee and want to get a paycheck and want to kind of have very clear goals and want to know what you should do and all that. Like that's completely fair. And so like it's not an environment for everybody. So I think there's kind of like, even if you would get rejected, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are bad at what you do or you're a bad person or you're like incompetent. It might also just mean that like you might not be, you might feel that you're not the right person for this environment.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Okay, I've there's so many things I want to cover. So I want to get through this phase process. We're never gonna, but so we have the transition from phase 1 to phase 2. There's not a leadership process. It's just, again, you just recruit more people to move there, and that's what gets you to phase 2. Is that correct? I'm still not 100% clear on how that happens.
Yeah, to be honest, neither am I, because this kind of changes, and
Fair
it's
enough.
every project is a little bit different always, like, and every story is a little bit different. But like basically you start scaling, but you could sum it up as like you do scale it up like gradually as the confidence grows. So
Okay.
as
That
you summed it
that
up
makes
like
perfect
earlier.
sense.
So like,
Okay. So then we go, then what's next? What's next after phase 2? I assume phase 3, but maybe you can surprise me here.
so phase 3 is basically like we are live. So phase 2 can usually last quite a lot of time, and unfortunately that has started to like last quite a lot of time lately for games. So we are like in the early days, like games like Heyday and Clash of Clans, for example, the first big hits that were launched, I think it was like 6 months or something, or was it even less, when from like uh, from starting them to like launching them. But now we're like talking years, and that's not like, that's something that we are a bit struggling with, and we're like talking about it a lot, and trying to like figure out how can we make things work, how can we validate these games like faster, because that this is now like an issue of this, that we're very afraid of showing our games to the public, because like we don't want to show anything like half baked. We want it to be like very ready, and but that means that it takes a lot more time, and and so yeah. So again, like the basic principle in a way of of game development, like validate your game, validate your project like as fast as possible, like validate every phase of your project as fast as possible, and we become like a little bit slow on that. But
And flesh out,
we're
flesh out, validate for me here, because I think
yeah.
this
So
is really important.
validate would be that like, okay, is this, well, I guess you could sum it up like, is this game worth pursuing? Is this game gonna be the kind of hit that we're looking for? But also when you validate individual things, like if we go to the game design level, you validate, for example, a feature, or you validate the moment-to-moment gameplay. There's like, okay, are we in the right direction? Is there something fundamental that we should be looking at to like change or tweak before this is ready? So
Yeah, so I understand that when I'm, I play test a game, I get feedback directly. I could say, yep,
yep.
this is good, this isn't. I take that feedback, I parse it out. But is that all we're talking about here? Is there something else when, you're validating
Well,
entire
at some,
economic systems, you're building a whole different setup? How are you doing that without showing it to the public and getting feedback from real test audiences?
yeah, it's kind of both. It's kind of both, because the thing is that like, now if we are very afraid of publishing the game, of showing this game to the public and putting it out there, then what happens is we want to build all of that before we do that, right? Like we have to like, we need to make sure that it has like a really great like progress game, a really good meta game where you're like how you progress in the game. We need to make sure that the balance is great there. We need to make sure, of course, that the moment to moment gameplay is fantastic. We need to make sure that we have all these things like Supercell ID or other APKs and stuff like that, like covered. Servers need to be perfect. We need to be able to scale to those millions of players. Uh, and we need to have content for like a bunch of months, and we need to have a plan for how do we live operate the game, etc. So all of these take a lot of time to build and to plan. And but then it might be that actually there's like something wrong already with the moment to moment gameplay. So something that we now actually like quite recently did for the first time, which was kind of cool, that the game that I'm working on at the moment, which is called Squad Busters. I'm one of the game designers now there in that game. We had like a limited time closed beta, and so what that meant is we invited, or like actually like yeah, we invited a bunch of people, but we limited the player amounts to, well, it was 5,000 like the first closed beta, so I guess that's like quite a lot of players, but that's like very very little for us. So that was like kind of super small test from our point of view. uh,
Hmm.
and and we had it running only for 7 days, so we didn't have like we didn't have content. We only had relevant content for like 3 days of gameplay. And so that allowed us then to like that, hey, we don't have to have like everything polished and all that, so we can validate this a bit earlier. And we got a lot of good feedback then. Like we really only focused on like testing the moment to moment gameplay, that really the core gameplay of the game. And we got lots of valuable feedback from the players. Of course, we can later talk about like player feedback and how to like kind of how to analyze that and how to react to that. But like then we listened to the players, we made some pretty big changes. But now, because we were able to like close the game and just like work in peace, we were able to like really do like a lot of changes fast. Like it's a bit different to working in a live environment when you have to like constantly care about the players who are like already playing there. That takes also some effort and focus.
Right. Yeah. Live operations, a whole other subject that we maybe get into if we have time.
And so then we were able to like have another limited time beta like pretty soon after that, and that kind of like that then like was really successful. We had made some really good changes, and that was like a pretty successful like beta then,
Oh,
like in the sense of like player sentiment and stuff, and they were like super happy with the changes that we did. So excited
great.
to
Well, that's great. So it's actually really nice to hear now you actually still evolving your process and
absolutely.
being able to kind of counteract.
Yeah, it's so now it's kind of, now that's for example discussed now, especially the new games and games that are in this what I call like phase two. So like moving towards this launch, like they are now talking a lot about like maybe they should also do these like limited betas and stuff like that. Maybe that would make sense, so that like
All right. So I wanna I don't know how much you know about kind of what the marketing and launch process looks like for games like this, or if you can speak to it. But I'm interested in that, and I also want to unpack for people, because this is a principle I actually learned and I talked about in my podcast episode with Peter Adkison. But I want to flesh it out
yeah.
here because your numbers are even bigger than the ones I talked about with him. Um, if you have a game and it's people love it, and you're confident that you could make tens of millions of dollars a year with it, or even maybe $100 million a year with it, and you as a designer have to decide to kill that game, most people listening are going to think that that's crazy. Can you explain why it's not crazy, and how you think about that, or how the company thinks about it?
uh yeah,
Or
being
or does it, or do you agree? Do you think it's
it is
crazy?
crazy. It is crazy. It is quite crazy, and it is not like, it is not easy. It's far from it, and it's very like emotionally very taxing to do that. But I still, so yeah, I've been in that position once, and and it was like, yeah, it's very taxing, but I think ultimately I'm happy that we made the decision rather than like that we would have been told, no, you can't, like this, like stop working, like go and do something else. That like
Interesting. So there is so there is something going on behind the scenes here. That there's a you're responsible. We trust you to make the right decision. But if you don't make the right decision, we're going to make the right decision for you. That's what I
no
just
no
heard.
no 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 that's not what I mean. I mean that like kind of it's good that like I think part of the reason the culture works, like this is one of those like hard things that the culture brings with it. But when you make that decision yourself, it's easier for you to not get bitter about it, like that you had to go
I
through
see.
that
I
thought
see.
process. You had to make that like conclusion yourself, that no, this is not gonna be like,
Yeah.
because ultimately, like you do have that one kind of, how would I say, like in a way, green light, like this needs to be a hit game. So like you have to like ask yourself then, like kind of like, will this be that hit game? And eventually you'll get numbers, so you have like, you can make a way more educated guess, uh, based on like kind of science and the data as well. But it's still always like a judgment
What
call.
can you unpack that a little bit? What does that mean? Because you're not actually playing it live at this point. So what are these numbers and science
No,
and
no. At
data?
this, no. I'm actually talking about the situation where you are playing it live, like when the game is already like out there, and you are like kind of, you're seeing numbers, but it's still like kind of a limited amount of people, but
I see.
like kind of limited amount of countries, let's say.
Like a test
Yeah,
market.
like a
Okay,
test
got it.
market.
So you'll launch a game, and then and again, it's just worth unpacking because a lot of people won't be familiar with
Yeah,
this. So the typical process when you move from phase 2 to phase 3 is you're going to pick some small markets to try to launch and do a smaller scale launch.
yeah.
That's just
That's a
yeah. Go
typical.
ahead.
That's a very typical thing, like in like the mobile space, especially, that like you do some test markets. And it varies really. Like there are some like kind of classic proxy markets, but that it changes a little bit. So you might be trying Philippines to like test out the Asian market. You might be testing in Canada to test out like the North America, the US market, but or the UK, to test the. But yeah, it varies a little bit. But there are like kind of, you test in like, usually you test in like smaller market, but that's also varies. Some people want to go like straight to the big markets, but like still you don't go like fully global usually. And then you get data. So you get like actual numbers from actual people, like people install the game, like do they retain. And now here's like maybe something that like, what we look at first and foremost is retention. And retention is about like how uh, how many people return to the game in like the consecutive days, and like the days that like after the first one. So the retention is like really like a kind of an like, and there's lots of games then benchmark, like our own games, but also like in the industry, that you can benchmark then to like, okay, uh like how sticky is the game, how engaging is the game. And that's kind of like the first and most important thing at evaluating. Usually the monetization is like easier to figure out than the retention. Like if the retention isn't there, like if people are not like engaged with the game, then like it doesn't matter what kind of tips or what kind of tricks you use on like on monetization side, for example. Like if people love the game, they will also like, they will be super fans who then pay for the game, and all that. So like retention is like really the key. Like the game needs to be like good, the game needs to be sticky.
Yeah. And how do you define what is
So
what's
that's the
what's
first thing.
good, what's bad, what's stellar?
uh well, I think I can't unfortunately like share the exact like numbers, but like but you would be looking at what you would well, maybe I can like quote some like kind of industry standards in a way, that what are used like usually in the mobile game industry, and what people like. So you might be looking, for example, at like day 1, day 3, and day 7 retention, and then day 30 retention if you have people playing. And that would mean day 1 retention would mean that how many percent of the players who install the game on day 0 like also played on day 1. So if you would now install a game, play it, will you play it also tomorrow? And then day 3 is like, will you play it also in 3 days, in 7 days, or in 30 days, etc. And that number, like really good games have actually like hover in the like 50 like day 1 retention. Sometimes some really good ones, you might have the initial players who are like the super fast, they might be like in the 80% or something. So like we're not talking about like, it's very like it's not realistic that 100% of the players would play the following day or play in 7 days or so. Like we're talking about like a curve that goes down really fast.
Well,
but yeah, it's unfortunate that I can't really like.
It's important. Little note that I learned. Yeah. I learned no, it's okay. We could talk about just general industry standards, right? And so my understanding is that you're going day 1, 50% is great, and then I think day 30, like I think it's something like 7% is still really good. I think is the last number I saw. I'm trying to remember what the
and like if you have at the day 30, if you have like 15% of the players, so like at day 30, 85% of your players would have already left, and you would have 15% left. That would be almost considered like super hit numbers. Like, so that's kind of like
yeah. So you give it. It's crazy to think about how much those drop offs are, and that's best case. So these games are, people leave them very quickly. And I think you said something really important that actually I didn't realize. I didn't know when the first time we launched SoulForge as a digital app, we had these insane retention numbers, just insane, and it wasn't. And then I realized that exactly what it. The super fans are the ones that come first, and so they are going to be super super sticky. And then as you try to scale and bring in more users, maybe that aren't as much directly in that super fan core audience, those numbers are going to drop. And so you have to be very careful about overweighting your early numbers. And when you're doing this,
now of course, like the super fans are like super important. They are the evangelists of your game. They are very valuable, and they are like, and they're great. But you have, when it comes to like kind of the raw numbers, like you have to kind of like exclude them if you want to see like, okay, how is it for real, like when it comes to like, do I want to scale this now or not? So yeah, we what those are called in the industry, they're called the golden cohort, like the first cohort of players who come into the game.
The golden cohort. So then now I kind of want to I really love this walkthrough. I feel like I've got a much clearer picture of how the company makes decisions, how you build things. This retention is the fundamental metric. There may not be an answer for this, but I'll pose the question anyway. Right? There's obviously every game. You want the game to be sticky. You want it to be great on its own. Have you learned some kind of more generally applicable kind of tips or tricks or principles that help to make this, kind of give you that instinct of, no, this is going to be stickier. This is going to have that retention. This is going to keep people coming back. What is it that's there? And you can speak to the designs of the moment to moment game. You can speak to principles for the kind of meta game and the progression charts. Like, what is it in your mind that really can be applicable broadly, that can move the needle on this kind of game?
Yeah, that's a good question. Like I think like every game is its own story and its own path. So it's like really hard to say. Like certainly, like you have to, when you are like kind of making the game and when you are doing your play tests within the team or within the company or by yourself, like you have to like trust quite a lot your own instinct and like develop your own intuition on that stuff. And there's no like, I don't think there's like ever like a right answer, but like if you've made games, and also like actually like if you've just played games, you kind of know when it just clicks, when it like, this just feels right, like things just click here now. So those are the kind of feelings that you're kind of like looking for, that you're like gonna you're scanning for, that when does it click, and how do you get that? Like that's really hard to like generalize or say like any general rules, because it really depends on the game, the genre, the platform, like anything, like when does it click. But like ultimately, like you still can't like kind of replace the like just test and like get that feel, because you can theorize and you can discuss and you can talk about it like forever, but like when you actually play it, actually try it out, that's when you kind of like get those feelings. So yeah.
Yep. No, that's been a consistent message from every designer, and unfortunately, it's not the
Yeah,
answer a lot of people want to hear. They want do X, Y, and Z, and then you'll have a hit
exactly. Yeah,
game, and everything's going to be fine. It's just not the way it works. But training your own instincts is really critical here too, right? You mentioned you play games, you pay attention to your emotions when they come up, and what things as you put it click. As you design games, you get feedback and you cycle it through. You can feel it for yourself, and it's not easy. I continually try to find better ways to explain this or to
yeah.
teach this, because it sounds fuzzy to a lot of people, right? No, I just trust your gut, right?
Yeah, it is very fuzzy, and you kind of like has and you have to like maybe eventually like someone smarter than us can like conceptualize this and like actually make this into like some theory and some like method that like works, foolproof method. But like yeah, but it feels very fuzzy, and like, and it is this like, I guess like design intuition, you could like call it, or something that you just kind of get trained
Well, yeah.
over time. And I think I think like one it's like I kind of like I try to be very sensitive about this also, like just on like micro design level. Like let's say I recently worked on the kind of the first 3 days of the meta progression of the game that I work on. And so I changed the numbers and I played it myself. I just played it alone, like over and over again, like the AI. And then I like kind of was like super sensitive about like feelings, that okay, here, like at this moment, like when I'm kind of like at day 2 or something, like I felt that this moment where the progress kind of halted. And then I want to like dig into that. Okay, why did it halt? Why did my feeling of progress halt at this point? And like, how can I change this? What should I change? Let's tweak these numbers here. Let's tweak that. Like, let's put a little bit more gold there, and let's change the character there or something. And then I tried it again from the beginning, and then it was okay. Now that feeling wasn't there, so clearly, like what I changed like made matters. So like trying to be like sensitive about like these kind of things, like also at the very micro level when designing, like that's at least something that I tend to do.
Yeah, that's great. And so this is one of the things I talked a lot about this in the episode with Ben
Mm.
Brode when we were, and his work on Marvel Snap. And you've had a lot of similar experiences. Clash Royale is, a card game in many senses. Some tower, it certainly is a card game in some sense. And so what is it that when you're trying to test these meta
Sure.
progressions, right? I can test an individual game and have a complete experience in, in this case, minutes, easy to iterate, easy to test. When I'm testing a progression that's supposed to last not just days, but weeks, months, years even of progression, it's nearly impossible. I mean, it is
Yeah.
impossible to test the whole thing, right? So you mentioned this. Oh, I'm just going to test the first 3 days,
Yeah.
and I'm going to tweak it. I'm going to test the first 3 days again. Is that how you think about it? It's like I really just got to dial in those first 3 days, and the rest kind of takes care of itself. Or how do you approach this kind of problem of designing and balancing and getting the feel right for this meta progression of day to day?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and that's something that I'm kind of constantly learning and trying to like get better at, because it is indeed like very tricky. So uh, in this case, like I was working on the first 3 days because that was the scope of our closed beta, so I only had to focus on the first 3 days. But something that is also like very helpful, like when doing that exercise, when I was just focusing on that, I also learned a lot about how the game works, how the meta works, how there's numbers. Okay, okay, this is how it feels when you get too much gold, or this is how it feels when you get too little gold, or whatever. Like so you kind of even if you're like just focusing, I'm not focusing on the late game, but it informs me about the late game, because like if it feels like this here, it's probably going to feel like something similar when it happens like at day 30 or something like that. But but ultimately, like ultimately you can't replace just testing, but just testing is like really hard in these cases. So there are like tools you can use, or methods that you can use. So you could have the game running on the side. So you might have a version that has like some version of the meta progress while you're like working on the game. Maybe that's for friends and family. And this is, for example, something that they did in Marvel Snap, and this is something we've done a couple of times, like at Supercell as well. That you have like a game running, for example, for 30 days. That it's just like going on, and like people can play. Mostly they're playing against AIs if it's that kind of game, or in games like Heyday, you're just like playing the game by yourself, farming around. But then, so then you get like a feel of this a little bit like longer progression. The tricky thing is that like then you notice that something is wrong. You make changes. So how do you verify that? Well, you have to start from the beginning, and that's slow. That's again like very slow. So it's it's tough. Then you can, of course, like the one method is using bots, or using like simulations. That's very effective to like validating some like long-term progress factors, that like you don't have something like completely whack like in your numbers. But that doesn't, the thing with like bots and simulations is that they don't like really convey you the feeling of like how does it feel when it's day 14 and I wake up in the morning and I have this game that is now like part of my life. How does it feel like when I play my first session in the morning, when I go to the loo in the morning? That's a relevant thing. How does it feel when I go to bed, when I play my last session, when I do what's the thing I do as the last thing before I go to bed, so that it feels good that I go to bed, so that it doesn't feel like, oh, I'm obliged to like stay awake, that I need to like, it needs to feel good. So like ultimately, again, it's like it's about like the player experience. It's about the feeling that the player has, that they need to be, that it needs to be like kind of good. Because these games are like tricky, because they are like, we're making games that are meant, the goal is that these are played for years. So we have to like, they become, if you play them for years, they become like part of your daily routine. So we have to be respectful of that, right? We have to like understand that this is now like part of your daily routine. Like it can't be like, it needs to be engaging, but it can't be like too crazy, so that you like burn yourself out or like get stressed because of it or stuff like that. So and that's like really tricky. It's not like something that we do always like perfectly, but it's like something that you have to be very mindful of as a game designer, and when balancing these games.
Do you have a specific example of a decision that you made to help people sleep better that comes to mind in something along these lines?
Yeah.
That makes this a little more concrete?
Something very specific could be the chest system in Clash Royale, and the exact timers that the chests have. So the chests in chess system in Clash Royale is such that like when you play a match, if you win, you get a chest, and to you don't immediately get the cards and the loot that is in the chest, but you have to open it, and you start a timer. So you start the chest, so it might have a timer of 3 hours or 8 hours or 12 hours, and then you wait, and then you get after that timer is done, you get to open it. So now there's quite a lot of packed, quite a lot of like lessons and dilemmas tied to this like this chest system. But something that it does now for this thing is that like, okay, like you it's late at night, like you want to have a chest opening all the time, right? Like you don't want to like miss out on time, because you can only have one chest opening at a time. Okay, nowadays you can have two, and so etc. But that's a different story. But let's say you can only have one chest opening at a time. So you want to make sure that when you're sleeping that there's chest opening. Like if you're really engaged, you kind of, and if you're like a super fan, again this goes also to the principle of like people will like optimize the fun out of games. So like if you would only have chests that have a 1 hour timer, there will be guaranteed be players who put an alarm clock on during the night to put the chest opening, like to open like once per hour. So you want to have chests that have an 8 hour timer or a 12 hour timer, and you want to ensure that players get those chests during the day so that they can like go and sleep in peace.
Yep. Okay, great. No, it's a great example. And so, we're building these items, and now we've talked a lot about this kind of retention as the number one metric, and then the habits that connect people to that, the rhythms of their lives, right? What do I do when I wake up? What do I do when I go to bed? Making this a part of your life, especially as mobile games, right? You're playing it when you're on the toilet, you're playing it while you're waiting in line. You have all these different options that are accessible. And so how does that integrate is great. And now, we kind of put monetization off to the side, but I'd like to talk a little bit about that. And I know we're running a little late, but we'll run a little late because this is exciting and interesting. And so, now if somebody wants to open that chest faster, they can pay to do that, right? So there's a variety of different things that are available. That now, how do you think about monetization? I know this can be a very contentious subject. Just to put it out there, right? I believe games have to monetize in order to be able to make them. So but how do you think about finding that line of how do you monetize? How do you think about monetization?
This is a very touchy topic, of course. Like monetization is it's very very loaded, very very tricky topic, and also like internally, it's not like we all have like one single mind about like monetization. That we have lots of discussions about monetization, lots of heated discussions about how to monetize, how not to monetize, what's the best strategy, and how do we make. But ultimately, everybody certainly agrees that like we need to make money. Like it's a business as well, and we need to pay salaries, and people have mortgages, and people have kids, etc. So like something needs to happen. But monetization. One tricky thing is that like it kind of like, compared to traditional games, monetization in free-to-play games is like it creates this weird adversary like relationship between the player and the developers. Like in like a toxic extreme, it creates this adversary like kind of position. Which, for example, in this chest example, so now I talked about how the timers are there to make you feel good about going to bed, but players might see the timers purely as a way to make money. So it's, and like that, oh, they put a timer here just to like screw with me. Like it would be much better if it wouldn't have a timer, but then you would burn yourself out because you wouldn't feel like there's a moment where you can like just like leave the game be when you have played for like 360 days, etc. So like, and that's like a super hard balance to like find. And there I don't like have a clear answer, but there, for example, how I see the speeding up chests in Clash Royale is that like it's an option. So now like, yes, we give you these timers so that you can like manage them into the rhythm of your everyday life. But if you pay, you can like manipulate that yourself. Like you can like ignore what we are offering you, and you can like kind of, you can play more, you can get rewarded more if you want to have like a longer session, for example, or something. But it's like purely optional. So that would be like how I would see it.
I think that there's these different aspects of it where I think I always have this sort of philosophy that I want to be able to give people a ton of value such that when I ask them to pay me for something, they're very happy to do so. And one of the nice things, there's degrees where that's not going to be the case, but one of the nice things in principle about free to play is like, look, I can give you a bunch of stuff for free, and therefore you could accrue a lot of value before I have to ask you for money. And that's one principle that in theory works better, right? When you buy a game at the store, whether it be a board game for $40 or a traditional kind of console game for $60, $50, whatever it is, you're stuck. You bought that thing, and like it or not, you've now had this huge upfront cost, which means a bunch of people never get to experience it at all because it's too expensive. Whereas free to play games now, they live off of the whale concept, right? This is the kind of tricky other side of this, that there's a very, very small percentage of players who pay. I forget what the numbers were like last time I looked at it. It was something like, the 0.1% of players pay 90% of all of the money that goes into these. I don't know if that's still accurate, but it was something crazy like that. And so you end up, in theory, having to cater to that small demographic. Is that kind of still the way that it's working these days, or
it varies quite a lot from game to game, but like yeah, the whale economy is certainly still exists, but there's quite a lot of push both in the industry and also like within our company to kind of the thinking of like how do we get like more people, how do we like increase the conversion so that like we wouldn't be reliant on these these individuals or like then this very small percentage. Like how can we get like more people to pay for example like $5 per month or something like that. And that, for example, the season pass, which now I can't remember like which was the first game that like kind of introduced the season pass. Maybe it was Fortnite that made it popular or something, I'm not sure, but that, for example, like that's like the opposite of like a whale-based monetization, right? Like you are giving huge value for a very small for a fairly small like kind of payment, and but you also like then ask for like engagement from the player. So
yes, yeah, I like the idea of there being some small kind of consistent no-brainer investment, if you will, something that people can do, that the nice thing about the season passes is some combination of paying and earning, right? The free to play idea is I can just play and earn. If I pay a little bit, then I can earn way faster and I get some cool goodies. And then, it's such a good deal that I'll take it. And then for people that want even more faster, then you have higher price items and whatnot they can get into. I think there's definitely something great there.
Yeah, and I think there are certainly some principles that are like I would say like we at Supercell like everybody agrees on, like things like things that you have in your game, especially like everything that is related to gameplay, like it needs to be earnable also for free. Like there should not be anything that is like purely behind like a pay gate. We could make exceptions on something like let's say cosmetics or early access to something or something like that. Like that could maybe be examples where it could be like pay only, but like basically for free you would be able to like eventually at least get like anything that exists. Yeah,
it's a good principle to make it feel a little better. I mean, a lot of these games where you're
I mean it varies of course, and it's not like kind of like if there are fans of our games listening to this, that like of course like we're not perfect always in all these aspects, but that is certainly like a principle that we really need to like stick to. And sometimes it's a bit of a gray line, that is it really like free if it takes years to like reach or whatever, then like kind of, but yeah, that's kind of the principle.
Yeah, that's that. There's a lot of that, right? Where the if you want to compete at the highest levels in games like Clash of Clans and these other ones, it's very the amount of time it takes to get to that tier compared to spending. It's very, at least not realistic for most people. So it could be a challenge for sure. So I'm wondering. All right, we're a little over time, so I think that there's infinite depth on all of these conversations. I think
we have like like yeah, it's been quite sporadic. I feel that I haven't been very good at like explaining it in a like very concise way and like all these topics, but there's like kind of
you've done great.
Yeah, I feel that we are like just scratching the surface of like of many things here.
Yeah.
I want to say about monetization one thing about like this uh, monetization versus like free to play and like and all that. Like so, ultimately, it's really about like the player experience in a way. Whether you pay or you don't pay, like it's our responsibility to like create like our as game developers to create like a great experience for the players. That's what we want to do. We're not, it's not always perfect, but that's like kind of that's where we aspire, right? Like that's the goal, that you should have like a great experience, whether you pay a lot, whether you pay a little, or don't pay at all. uh, and so like yeah, I think that's something that's like kind of important to do.
Yeah, player experience is the only
Yeah,
metric that matters at the end of the day. That is the thing that we're all building, and I know just people. It's very easy to demonize companies that have that are trying to make money. I think that's I think that's ridiculous. I think there are definitely bad practices. There are definitely things that are
yeah.
predatory, but I think the idea that you are able to provide this experience and for more money you can accelerate the experience or have variations on the experience seems totally reasonable to me, and it's what allows the games millions and millions of players to play for free because these things exist. So
and
um I,
yeah, and if you
yeah, go
want
ahead.
to develop these games for years, if you want to keep on making new new content for the game, new features to the game, or in your case, if you want to make new expansions to Ascension or new expansions to Soulforge Fusion, like if the game doesn't make money, then like that's not going to happen. Like you're not going to get, so like that's also about player experience. So if you are a super fan of the game, you do want the company to make money so that they keep on developing the game, so it's like so that you get like again like more and better experiences.
Yep. Yep. Um, so as you mentioned, there's we could continue to dive deep on all of these things, and I appreciate it. You made one comment earlier that you said we would get
Mm.
to, and I just want to make sure we do cover. You talked about how to react to and analyze
Ah, yeah.
player feedback, and I don't want to leave people hanging on that because that's such a another great deep topic. So why don't we'll use that as our last like meaty topic, and then we can close out with anything else you want to say before we wrap up.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, that's yeah, how to analyze, like how to talk about look at like player feedback. That's something that's kind of like I feel that I'm I'm constantly learning a lot, well, as I'm about like everything, but like constantly learning about like how to read player feedback, because it can get quite toxic. Like when you have millions and millions of players, you can imagine that like you have players like as many players as there are like people in like medium-sized countries or even big countries. And so like there's a lot of different kind of people in that kind of group, and so you kind of get a lot of different kind of feedback, and not everything is nice, not everything is written very nicely or expressed very nicely.
That is a nice way to say that. There's a cesspool of hate and vitriol out there.
And it can be quite stressful. I've certainly burned out a little bit with that with reading that. But like so you but something you kind of have to when reading that feedback or when kind of receiving it, you need to kind of like as a developer try to like read between the lines, that what are they actually saying. So as an example, now with our game Squadbusters, uh, the when we had our first closed beta, the number one feedback that players gave to us was that like, hey, uh, you should make more game modes. You should just like make more game modes, because like it's too repetitive. That like you there needs to be like different things, different rules, etc. And and we listened to that, but we didn't want to make new game modes straight out, so that like because there are some things that happen when you make like a completely different game mode, like you for example you split the player pool, that now you have players who and that starts to affect like matchmaking times and stuff. So now you have like half the players are playing mode A and half the players are playing mode B. Also, like if you maybe stagger them, that like sometimes mode A is available and it's and sometimes mode B, then you might be that people start to have like really really strong preferences and might not want to play when their favorite game mode is not on, or something, and then they start to demand that like, hey, this should be on always, why isn't this on always, and stuff. So it creates some issues with that. So we wanted to kind of like avoid some of those issues, and it also didn't feel right to our game. So this is also like important. You have to like understand your game that you are making, what is correct to it, what is correct to like uh, to that experience. So what we instead did, we did these like game modifiers. So it's kind of like game modes, but not really. So what happens is it's kind of like, let's say, Fall Guys has these different game modes, but what happens is when you go to a game in Fall Guys, it randomizes which one you're now playing. So we did something similar, but we kind of like, we still have that same core game there, but we modify that. Like we show you that, okay, you're gonna play on this map, and in this one, like some of the monsters are golden, or in this one you get like extra spells or whatever. Like there might be some different kind of like special rules that apply to this combat. There's extra bosses, or there's some like meteorites that are like raining down during the game. And so now you have we had then our second test, and now, well, players still complained about things, but they didn't complain about variation and game mode. So like we managed to fix this thing, not with the exact thing that the players said, but like with by understanding our game and understanding our audience and reading between the lines, that what do they actually want. So what we heard was like, they said they want game modes, but how we interpreted that was that like they want variation. And so we created variation, and we created like a system that actually allows us to create even more variation than what the kind of traditional method would have allowed us, because now we can like crank out lots of these. This would be similar to, like, let's say if we would take Marvel Snap as an example, which was also like could straight say that it was also one inspiration, like how they do locations, which is like super brilliant. That you kind of like go into a match, but you don't know exactly what's going to happen. You have your deck, but you don't know like exactly what locations are there, and then they get revealed during the game, and then you have to adapt to that. So that was kind of the vibe, that like you get something random happens, and then you have to adapt to that. And that was kind of like it felt like it fit
Yeah.
our game. Like our game is a little bit of this like kind of competitive party game. You could imagine like Mario Party or something like that. So it has kind of like that kind of vibe.
Yeah. No, the value of this is I always just go back to my favorite Neil Gaiman quote, which speaks to this principle, right? When you're he's talking about books, but same applies to games. When your readers tell you that something is wrong, they're almost always right, and when they tell you how to fix it, they're almost always wrong. Right? If you get enough feedback that says there's a problem, there is a problem. But what they're telling you is the way to fix it is almost never. That's where the skill of game design comes in. That's where your instincts. It's like, okay, what's really going on here? What's causing this experience? How do I solve it? And then how do I make sure that it doesn't create a whole host of new problems that obviously the players aren't even foreseeing? So that's great. That's a great piece of feedback to echo.
Yeah, and you do kind of you do wanna surprise the players. Like you do wanna like kind of exceed their expectations if you can. Like that's the ultimate like result. Like kind of like if you manage to like kind of fix the problem and exceed their expectations, then that's like fantastic. Yeah, but yeah.
Yes, that's a great principle to end it on. So if there's so much great stuff to unpack here. I'm pretty sure we could have done in a whole other 2 hours, even just covering the same topics, let alone other things I wanted to talk to you about. So
yeah, there's a lot to talk about.
So if people want to find more, you've talked a little bit about the games you're working on. If they want to find more of your stuff or kind of connect, whether it's connecting with you online or playing more of your games, where
so I don't really have like much of an online presence. Like I'm not active on like social medias that much, but you could if you wanna contact me, you could contact me on LinkedIn, for example. That could be a good place. And then of course, like Supercell games, you can go to supercell.com, and also like Supercell is very active like in all the social medias. You can find the official accounts there, and all the games that we have are also like on all the social medias very actively, and also like playable on iOS and Android.
Well, I want to thank you again for doing this. I knew we were going to have a great chat because we already had one when we first met at GDC. You delivered. There's so much great value here. So thanks for coming on, and I can't wait to play your new game when I finally get access to it.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was an honor to be here. This is my favorite podcast, game design podcast, and you've had some really amazing guests. So it's a huge honor to be a guest here.
Well, welcome to that honorific group. It's been great to have you. See you again soon.
All right. See you again soon.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's podcast. If you want to support the podcast, please rate, comment, and share on your favorite podcast platforms, such as iTunes, Stitcher, or whatever device you're listening on. Listener reviews and shares make a huge difference and help us grow this community, and will allow me to bring more amazing guests and insights to you. I've taken the insights from these interviews, along with my 20 years of experience in the game industry, and compressed it all into a book with the same title as this podcast, Think Like a Game Designer. In it, I give step-by-step instructions on how to apply the lessons from these great designers and bring your own games to life. If you think you might be interested, you can check out the book at thinklikeagamedesigner.com or wherever fine books are sold.